Hello, everyone, and thank you so much for joining me for Daily Spark with Dr. Angela. I am your host, Dr. Angela Butchester. You guys know what I like to do on my show. Say it with me. I want to enlighten, inspire, and empower you to become your best self. Now, Scripture reminds us that the tongue is a small thing that makes grand speeches, but a tiny spark can set a great forest on fire. And that's what we want to do today. We want to get you fired up about my guest. I'll be spending time with Stephen Hanna today. We'll be talking about his book, Bread of Life, The Simple Gospel. So go on, get comfy, get cozy, get your coffee or get your tea, because we are about to get started. Hello, Stephen. Thank you so much for joining me here on Daily Spark with Dr. Angela.
Hello, thank you for having me. This is excellent. I've been looking forward to this.
Absolutely. So glad to have you on. Now, as is tradition around here, we always give our guests a moment or two to introduce themselves. There may be some folks out there unfamiliar with you and your work. So first question for you is, tell us a little bit about yourself. What makes you, you?
Well, what makes me, me? Well, if you can tell by my accent, I'm probably not local to where you are at the moment. I am from Brisbane, Australia. I am currently a music teacher over here. I've been teaching for 16 years, and I sort of fell into the writing a book almost by accident, but not quite. So that's been a great love of mine over the last probably 4 or 5 years, is this exploring things through writing. So that's a little bit about myself and how I fell into publishing a book or writing a book.
Now, being an author, is that something that you have always wanted to do, or did you find that in this opportunity this was the best way to communicate your wisdom to the world?
My wisdom to the world. Big words, kind words. I did, I guess you'd say, devotions or talks at my church for a number of years now, which ended up being, sort of 30 minutes long thereabouts, and people there, friends of mine and other people at the church said, we really like what you've got to say. Have you thought about writing a book? So it took a little while, but I eventually took them up on that idea and decided that I would actually try and write a book. So the devotion or the talk that led me to write the book was actually one of the chapters in the book, which was on the bread of life. That's not the first statement. It's the first statement in the book that's examined, but it was where I started writing, and from there I thought, okay, where can I go with this? So I thought about the I am statements in the Gospel of John. I thought that'd be a good place to start, because that at least gives me a structure with which to work around. So that's where I started.
Now, when it comes to the title of the book, how did you come about the title of the book?
Well, I think the bread of life sums up what Jesus is to me, and it sums up what I think he could be for everyone who comes to know Jesus. He is what sustains us. It is that belief and that faith that gets us through every aspect of our lives, really. So I liked the analogy of bread, because bread itself is actually quite a simple recipe, a simple food to make. Bread of life, being that's what sustains us ultimately. And then I think his message is a simple message, by no means not necessarily a complex message, but I think the underlying thoughts and philosophies behind his message are a simple one. So the bread of life, I thought, encompassed what he is to me, and what he could be to everyone who accepts him and believes in him. And then I think his message is ultimately a simple one, hence the simple gospel.
Now, when it comes to the proper reader of the book, I like to ask the question this way, and that is it appropriate for anyone high school age and, for high schoolers, or should it be perhaps college age and older?
That's an interesting question. When I started writing, sorry, this is a bit of a longer. I'll get to the answer in a minute. When I started writing, I really didn't have a specific audience in mind. I wrote it as if I would like to read it myself. So something that was pretty simple to understand, simple to read, easy to get my head around. And when I look at the end product, I certainly think it is accessible by all ages. So high school, college, adults. I think anyone can read this and get a message from it. So by accident, I guess you could say, I think it's fairly accessible for, like you said, high school or higher than that, above that.
And I usually I've explained that I ask that question because I love giving books as graduation presents. And what a great time period to give someone something that can remind them of home, that they can take away with them when they go to school. So, but also at the same time get some new information. So I love it. I love it. Now, the proper way to read your book. Many authors will help us along this journey, and they will suggest that we read it from cover to cover, meaning that we simply read page after page. Others may do it like a devotional where you read, 2 or 3 pages, put the book down, and then start again tomorrow. Or did you do more so like chapters or sections where we should read that chapter before moving on to the next chapter? What's your suggestion there?
That's an interesting question again. The way it's set up, the way it's been written, you certainly can read it cover to cover. There's nothing wrong with doing that. The chapters or the order in which these I am statements that are in the Gospel of John appear in the Gospel of John are not necessarily the order in which I have put them as far as chapter order is concerned. So it would really be, I think it would be almost worth reading from cover to cover, and then perhaps if there was one of these statements like the way, the truth, the life, for example, if you wanted again to perhaps reread that chapter and then leave the book from there, then you could certainly do that. So there's options there for the reader. If the reader was really interested in, say, exploring the concept of, take the title, for example, The Bread of Life, what does that actually mean? They could certainly go to chapter 9, which focuses on the bread of life, and start reading from there. So that would be fine.
Thank you for that clarification. Now, for some of the authors that I've had an opportunity to spend time with, they said that they received kind of a prompt or a nudge from others that they have known along the way, meaning they read a story or a piece, or they've shared a story, a verbal story with them, or a written story, and that person says, oh my goodness, this needs to be a book. Did you get any that type of motivation or nudge from anyone? What prompted you to finally share this story in the form of a book?
It was actually when I did the talk at my church on the bread of life. We were actually in we were in COVID lockdown, believe it or not, here in Australia, or here in Brisbane. So it was all done over Zoom. So we still had our scheduled gathering, and I did the talk, and that was when, enough people again, the same people that had said, you should think about writing a book, but there was just a few more that said the same thing. You should really think about writing a book. We really enjoy what you have to, we really enjoy what you say and your interpretation of scripture and presentation of your interpretation of that scripture and how it relates to life and real events and things like that. So it was really at that point that I went, okay, I will actually, attempt to do the longer form writing rather than just the smaller, devotions and talks. I will commit to putting this in a book. So that's what just not pushed me over the edge, but that's what really prompted me. It was just a few more people saying, we really like this. So I went, okay, all right, I'll be obedient and I'll put it all in a book.
And I'm so glad that you did, because I have found that there are so many authors that said that they had not thought about actually being an author or a writer or a novelist or, whatever label they want to put on themselves there, until someone kind of gave them that nudge. But it was the confirmation when it became 3 or 4 or 5 people also saying that. So yeah, there really is some importance there. I love it. Now, when you were in the process of writing, was there any part of the story that you found to be more difficult to fashion or to mold in a way that would make it easy for the reader to understand?
I hope this doesn't necessarily come across as, like I'm an expert, but what I found with this book was, because I decided to follow a set structure, because there are a set number of statements that Jesus says in John where he says, I am the, insert what they are. Because that gives you a structure, I didn't find the process of writing all that difficult. What was difficult at times was maintaining just ensuring that every day I sat and I read and I spent time writing. It was the time that it took was probably the most challenging part to it, because even though it's 130 something pages long, that it took me, and this might be much less the more people write, but it took me probably about 6 months to get it all together and compile it all and make sure it all flowed and made sense from one chapter to the other. And then it was just expanding upon the scriptures and finding real world examples and anecdotes that made sense and were appropriate to be used. That was the most challenging part. The structure itself, because that's set by scripture, that wasn't necessarily the most difficult part, but just ensuring that it all flowed and made sense and was easy to understand.
Absolutely. Now it is time for us to go to break, but before we do, can you remind everyone, Stephen, please, what is the title of your book? Where can we get a copy? And how do we stay in contact with you?
Okay, the book is The Bread of Life, The Simple Gospel. It is available on Amazon or wherever books are sold. It is also available through the publisher Westbow Press. That is westbowpress.com. you can actually follow me and my podcast, Christianity Out Loud, on Facebook,
Alrighty,
or YouTube,
everyone.
or Spotify.
Now you know where you can get a copy of the book. We'll be back right after this. And we are back. Thank you so much for joining me for Daily Spark with Dr. Angela. I'm your host, Dr. Angela Butchester. My guest today is Stephen Hanna, and we're talking about his book, Bread of Life, The Simple Gospel. Now, my next question for you is about the overall message that you want to make sure that every reader takes away from having read that book. Now, you may have put, one or two messages in there. Many authors do. But if there's nothing else that they take away, what is that one thing you want to make sure they grasp?
One thing I would like the reader to grasp is that Jesus is what sustains life. That's ultimately the message that I tried to get across through this. It's not necessarily an apologetic text. There are some elements of that, but it is certainly, it is coming at Scripture and the person of Jesus as if he were real and as if Scripture is true. Obviously, I believe that, but that's the perspective that is in the book. But just for the reader to understand that Jesus is for them. Jesus is for them. He will ultimately give life and sustain life and be the guide and be the comfort and, be the foundation of anyone and everyone's life. All we have to do is actually believe in him, and his message is a simple message. It is not a complex message. It is not a scary message. It is a simple message. That's ultimately what I would like the reader to take away.
And I like how you said that it's not overcomplicated. It's simple. It's not scary. So many times I think people try to make Christ much more difficult, much more fill in the blank there, right? Much more human. Yes. Where it's like that's not his nature. You're projecting your own stuff into the story. Stop doing that. We're trying to, make sure that people understand that it doesn't have to be that complicated. And I'm so glad that you picked up on that as well, and that's one of the messages that you're sharing with folks. Which leads me to the next question, and that is, what do you think helps make your book different or unique than some of the other books that we find on our shelves or on those virtual shelves out there?
Well, my book is real. Not that other books aren't real, but I find a lot of the time that with these sorts of books, they can approach the abstract more than they approach reality. And when looking at real world examples and real world anecdotes and the real world stories and personal stories that I've included in the book, I hope that it's relatable, that people can look at their lives and go, oh yeah, I've actually experienced something like this as well. So that the reader can really, look at a story and actually be empathetic and sympathetic and understand and also relate. So I can go, okay, this does actually apply to me and can apply to me. So that's what I really tried to do, was, make it very relatable and very real.
Now, there may be someone listening out there that says, I like what he's talking about, but I'm new to the faith. I've only been a Christian for the last 30 days. Will that person be able to follow along with the storyline, or do you need to have a little bit more faith under your belt, if you will, to be able to understand what you're sharing?
When I got into the process of writing and working out who this book was aimed for, I really came to three groups of people. and one of them was the person who was exploring faith. I hoped that to bring them closer to understanding the teachings in the person of Jesus. The other group, or one of the other groups, was the young Christian, the person who has made a decision recently to follow Christ. So what does all of that? What does all of this look like? There are certain parts of the Bible that are easier to access as a young Christian than other parts. I don't think that's an unfair statement to make. There's certainly parts of the Bible that me, as being a Christian for a number of years, are still quite difficult to interpret and to understand. But to the young Christian, I really hope to unpack these statements that Jesus said and to see them grow in faith, to see their faith develop while they maintain the sense of wonder and awe at the person and God incarnation of Jesus Christ. So, no, certainly a young Christian would be able to access. I would love people who were recently come to Christ to get a hold of this, and I really hope that it would be able to help them really understand Jesus more.
And I like that it is not only good for the mature Christian, but it's just as good for someone who's new to the faith. Which while you were talking, it made me want to ask you this question, and that is, would we be able to utilize this book for book club? I know that as the world is starting to open back up and we're starting to do those more in-person, face-to-face activities, book clubs are going to start meeting again. Would your book be appropriate for that, or is this a different type of read?
No, I think it would be perfectly appropriate for that. I mean, there's the chapters are easily laid out. There's certainly a study could come of this book. You could, if book clubs meet weekly and we want to read a chapter a week or 2 chapters a week or something like that, this book would be perfect for that sort of gathering or that sort of group. I actually had a friend of mine who purchased it and said, really like it. I'm going to use the chapters for topics for youth ministry. So it's certainly been done like that before. I think it would be good, really good for that sort of gathering and that sort of group and that sort of study type environment.
Oh, I love that. I love that. I know that for a lot of us, we have meetings, gatherings, whatever you want to call it, for our Faith It Fridays. And having something that is long-term, but something that's going to give you enough meat for the week, if you will, to kind of keep you going until you meet again. Those are perfect books. And I'm so glad that you said that, yes, that you thought your book would be appropriate for that as well. Now, if you will, I want to kind of shift gears just a little bit, and I love asking our established authors questions for our aspiring authors. They're one of the largest groups that really email and say thank you for asking the questions that you ask. So I want to ask you about publishing your book. Every author has to decide if they're going to self-publish or if they're going to use a professional service in any way, or try to pitch it to a publishing house. How did you decide to publish your book?
That was possibly the most difficult aspect of the journey. I went with, you don't mind me mentioning the name of the publisher, do you?
No, that's fine. Go ahead.
Okay, great. So I went with Westbow Press, and that they're a self-publishing company or self-publishing group, but they also put editorial aspects to it. So it wasn't just a matter of here's the book and they say yes, we'll publish it without looking at it or thought or anything like that. So that was a good experience. The fact that a publishing company read over the first draft that I sent and sent it was like having a conversation with an editor, basically. So it went backwards and forwards a number of times, as I imagine most books and texts like this do. So I found Westbow Press by accident. There was an ad online that I came across and just emailed them and said, "Here, I've got a manuscript. Would you be interested?" And they said yes, we'd be interested in looking at it, and read the first draft and said, yes, we really like this, so we'll take it on. So, but the deciding which way to go was probably the most difficult part. Why did I go self-publishing? I went self-publishing, or that more down that route, because I had hoped that this would not be my only publication, and to get into a more established, I guess you'd say, larger publishing house, then it's to have something that's been published and accepted and liked and been through that process, to take, say, that next step would be much better to have something like this, under my belt, as it were. So that's why I went on that route.
And that totally and completely makes sense. It reminds me of my story of that I share with folks, where it says, I want it to be on the radio. Of course, this was prior to my being on the radio, and I was just doing a podcast. And I said, well, if I want to be on the radio, I have to produce a wonderful podcast so that people, the radio stations, can hear what I do and know, okay, she's worth taking that chance on. So I could not agree with you more with that bit of advice. And what a wonderful note to leave it on there, a positive bit of advice. Well, Stephen, thank you so much for sharing about your book and your journey along the way as an author with us here today on Daily Spark with Dr. Angela. Before I let you go, can you remind everyone of the title of this book? Where can we get a copy? And if we want to get in contact with you regarding the book, how do we do so?
Yes, certainly. So the book is titled The Bread of Life, The Simple Gospel. It's available on Amazon and wherever books are sold, or via the publisher Westbow Press. And you can get in contact with me. You can use Christianity Out Loud. Search that on Facebook or YouTube or Spotify, and I can point you in the direction of the book.
Alrighty. Thank you again for being a guest on the show. And listeners, thank you for spending time with us here as well. We hope that we have enlightened, inspired, and empowered you again today. As always, may the Lord continue to shine His face upon you. May you receive His grace and His mercy in all that you do. Until next time, everyone, remember that you are blessed in the Lord. Have a great day, everyone.